They handed me a blanket like it was a favour and pointed to the lawn chair beside the fire pit. "There's no room left in the RV," his sister smirked, already sliding the door shut. My husband didn't look at me, just turned off the porch light, as if I weren't standing there barefoot, holding a torn pillow and the quiet shame of being unwanted. Inside, they slept warm. I slept watched by stars, mosquitoes, and my own disbelief. That night, I realised I was never part of their family. I was just furniture that learned to feel. And the next morning, I started the quiet revenge. They never saw coming. I used to think being loved meant being useful. That if I was helpful enough, patient enough, quiet enough, I'd earn my place. I didn't grow up with a loud family. My parents were church mouse quiet. My sister and I taught to say thank you even when it hurt. I learned early that feelings were something you carried alone, folded neatly like a handkerchief in your pocket, ready to wipe someone else's mess, not your own. When I met Dean, he was warm in the way I wasn't used to. Big laugh, arms always reaching to pull someone into a hug, the kind of man who introduced himself to strangers like he already knew them. His world was noisy, full of barbecue smoke, teasing, clutter, and open doors. At first, it felt like stepping into sunlight after a lifetime underground. I mistook the heat for love. Dean's family took to me in the way people take to a new couch, something that fits the room but doesn't quite belong to it. They were polite, mostly. They never said anything cruel outright. Not then. But there was always a tone. A tilt of the head when I said something that didn't quite land. A long silence after a joke. The way his sister called me sweet, the same way someone calls a stray dog sweet. I was the quiet woman in every photograph, off to the side, arms full of potluck trays or diaper bags, always cropped at the edges. No one ever asked me to be in the centre, and I never asked either. I thought it was kindness to make room for others. I didn't realise I was disappearing. We married in a small ceremony under a maple tree in Dean's parents' backyard. His mother insisted on doing the food. "We're a family that takes care of our own," she said. I made my peace with the lukewarm potato salad and the fact that my mother barely got to say anything during the toasts. My dress was off-white, bought second-hand, and I remember Dean saying, "It's simple, just like you." At the time, I thought it was a compliment. In the early years, I tried. God, I tried. I hosted Thanksgiving, driving back and forth between their kitchen and mine because his mother forgot things on purpose. I went to all the birthdays, the hospital visits, the weddings. I sent cards for every milestone. When his cousin got arrested, I took out a payday loan to help with bail. "She's family," Dean said. I nodded, even though she'd once told me my cooking tasted like it was scared. I worked at the local library part-time, shelving books, helping seniors print their tax forms, finding mystery novels for women who called me darling and smelled like rosewater and menthols. I liked that job. It was quiet and orderly, a place where things had a proper place and spine labels told you what you needed to know. Unlike home, where I never quite knew which version of myself I was supposed to be. Dean had big dreams, none of them with plans, a boat we never used, a side hustle that turned into debt. An RV he swore we'd travel the country in, though it sat parked behind his brother's garage for 3 years. Still, I stood by him. I let go of my own plans, art school in St. Louis, the studio apartment I almost signed for before we got engaged. "We'll figure it out together," he always said. I believed him. Looking back, I realised I was building a life for everyone else. Stitching together a quilt where every square had someone else's name on it. There wasn't a single patch for me, not one. Every time I tried to speak up, it came out soft. Maybe we could... I was thinking that perhaps... What if I just... And they steamrolled right over me. Not with cruelty. Worse, with indifference. When Dean's brother and his new wife moved in with us for just a few weeks, I gave up my art desk to make room. When Dean's mother had surgery, I slept in a hospital chair for 3 nights. I brushed her hair while she criticised my shampoo choice. They said I was so good to them, but they never asked what I needed. It's not that Dean was bad. It's that he was lazy with my love. He took it the way someone drinks water, grateful in passing, but never really noticing how essential it is until it's gone. I think he thought I'd always be there, soft and waiting, but something shifted in me, slow at first. A weight in my chest that began to pulse when his sister interrupted me again at dinner. A flicker in my hands when I folded their laundry, and found my favourite shirt stained with ketchup, crumpled under the bed. I used to tell myself, they don't mean any harm. But harm doesn't always come from intention. Sometimes it comes from repetition, from never being seen fully, from always being the one expected to yield. I remember one morning, I stood in front of the mirror, brushing my hair. I looked at myself like I was meeting a stranger. I asked out loud, "What do you want?" The silence that followed was the loudest answer I'd heard in years, and I didn't say it then, not yet, but something inside whispered, "Not this. Not like this anymore." They thought I was the kind of woman who'd keep carrying the load, even with a broken back. But they never asked what happens when the quiet one finally sets everything down and walks away. I built that life like a house without blueprints, nailing together walls from expectations, patching the roof with other people's emergencies. No one handed me a hammer. I picked it up myself, because saying no would have made me selfish. And selfish in Dean's family was the worst sin of all. Dean's mother used to say, "Family sticks together," but what she really meant was, "You do what we need and don't ask questions." And I didn't. Not for years. It started small. I skipped a girls' weekend with my cousin to drive Dean's brother to his court date, his third DUI. When Dean's niece forgot her sports fee, I quietly slipped $200 in an envelope and left it on the kitchen table. No one asked me to do it. They just expected it. And I believed love was what you gave without being asked. I became their ghost helper, the woman in the background solving things before they became problems. If someone needed a ride, it was my car. If they couldn't find a document, I was the one who dug it out from a file they forgot existed. I even paid the electric bill once for Dean's sister when her boyfriend walked out and took her debit card. She never paid me back. Didn't even say thank you. Every time I stepped up, they rewarded me with half praise. "You're a trooper. You're such a good sport. We don't know what we'd do without you." But those words were wrappers without candy inside. I kept waiting for real belonging, for someone to ask me how I was, what I dreamed. Of it never came. I gave up more than time and money. I gave up the colours I loved. My wardrobe slowly turned into earth tones because red makes your skin look blotchy, Dean's mother once told me. I stopped painting entirely. The old art supplies I packed when we first moved in together stayed sealed in a box at the back of the closet. Every time I saw it, I told myself, when things calm down, I'll open it. They never calmed down. When Dean's father passed, I coordinated the funeral. From the slideshow to the seating chart to the pulled pork sandwiches his mum insisted on serving. I remember standing in the kitchen the night before, pressing labels onto tiny glass jars of homemade spice rub, his father's recipe. I'd made 100 of them as favours. I burned my hand sealing the lids. Dean never noticed. His mum said, "It's nice you're so handy." Somewhere in that endless giving, I forgot what it felt like to be given to. Our marriage became a transaction, not a partnership. I paid the bills Dean forgot. I handled the taxes, the birthday cards, the thank you notes. He watched sports. He worked construction off and on, but half the time, he came home talking about slow seasons or fights with supervisors who didn't respect him. I stopped asking questions because I already knew the answers. He loved me, I think, in a passive way, in the way you love a house that doesn't leak. You don't think about it much until it's gone. And still I stayed, because I believed in loyalty, because my own family was fractured, scattered across the country, calling only on birthdays or holidays. Dean's family might have been loud and selfish, but they were there. They showed up, and I mistook presents for love. There were moments when I let myself dream. I'd imagine a small studio with sun pouring in, my easel in the centre, brushes in a mason jar. I'd see myself barefoot on hardwood floors, a cat curled on the windowsill. But then the phone would ring, and I'd be back in real life. Dean's mom needing help with a prescription, or his cousin asking if I could just run by the post office. It wasn't just them, it was me too. I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to choose myself without guilt. That RV was the final straw, even if I didn't know it at the time. Dean brought the idea up like it was his dream, but I knew better. His brother had one, and his pride couldn't take being left behind. He said we'd take trips, just us, that I could paint the landscapes we'd drive past. I co-signed because I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe in something. The loan approval came in my name. His credit was too bruised. He brushed it off like it didn't matter. We're married. What's yours is mine. I remember nodding, even as a small part of me said, that's not how loans work. We used it exactly once, just the two of us. One night, parked in a lakefront lot where the mosquitoes were louder than our conversation. After that, it became the family's mobile headquarters, birthday trips, tailgates, a Thanksgiving on wheels. His mom stocked it with her own dishes. His sister hung a dream catcher in the window. They made it theirs, and I let them. Sometimes. I'd sit in the back, near the little table that folded into a bed, and stare at the ceiling wondering how I got here. Wondering when the woman who once wanted to move to Asheville and paint old buildings became the one scraping pancake batter off someone else's skillet, while the radio played too loud for her to think. I didn't recognise my life anymore. It wasn't mine. It was built on the scaffolding of their needs, their noise, their rules. I was the beams holding it up, and they never once checked if I was cracking under the weight. But the cracks were there. Quiet at first, then louder, and still, I said nothing. Until one weekend, something shifted. Not a scream, not a storm, just a moment, a question dressed like a joke that tore the last thread loose, and I realised they never saw me as one of them. Only as the woman who didn't take up too much room. It was the kind of heat that made everything feel stuck to everything else. The air to your skin to the vinyl seat, the silence to the spaces between words. Labor Day weekend. Dean's family had planned a trip to the Ozarks, the same way they always did. Last minute, disorganised and loud about everything but the things that mattered. I packed the RV myself, again. I made lists, checked the propane, folded the towels. I even remembered to bring Dean's mother's special iced tea pitcher, the one she once said made the lemonade taste more like home. I brought it because I still wanted to be thought of as kind, or maybe because I didn't know who I was without being useful. Dean forgot our anniversary that morning. He didn't even flinch when I slid the card I'd written across the kitchen counter. "What's this?" he mumbled, chewing a protein bar, not even looking at me. I told him never mind. He didn't ask again. The drive was long and filled with static. He put on the classic rock station like he always did, turned it, up just loud enough that talking felt unnecessary. I stared out the window, counting the fence posts as we passed them, pretending they were milestones of something other than avoidance. By the time we pulled up to the site, his family was already there, clustered around fold-out chairs and a cooler full of beers. They cheered when Dean stepped out. No one said much to me. Just a couple of nods, a distracted wave from his sister. It stung less than it used to. Familiarity dulls pain, but it doesn't heal it. We unloaded in the heat. I handed out pillows, refilled the water tank, helped carry firewood. No one asked me to. But if I didn't do it, no one would, and somehow that would still be my fault. It wasn't one big moment that started the unravelling. It was all the small ones, like how there was no seat saved for me at the picnic table when dinner was served. Just a napkin and a plastic fork left on the end of the bench, next to the trash. Back. Like how Dean's mother asked his sister-in-law if she'd made the potato salad, even though I had. Like how his brother cracked a joke about how I never talked, then talked over me when I tried. At some point during the meal, Dean's sister brought up a story from his past, about a girl he almost proposed to before he met me. "She was wild," she said, laughing. "Not like our girl here." She meant me, the quiet one, the safe one. the one who always smiled even when the laugh line trembled. Dean laughed too. That was the moment I knew the woman they loved didn't exist. She was a reflection they built from convenience, a soft space to land, a shadow that didn't argue. Later that night, the RV felt too small. It always did, but this was different. It wasn't the size, it was the atmosphere. Heavy, like the air before a tornado. His mum claimed the fold-out bed because of her back. His brother and sister-in-law took the bunk since she's pregnant, you know. Dean's sister had already curled up on the little bench by the kitchen, her feet dangling off the end like a child playing house. I stood there holding my pillow, the one with the frayed corner I always brought on trips. It wasn't even a discussion. Just a look passed between them. Then his sister turned to me and said lightly, "Would you mind taking the lawn chair tonight? We've got a full house. In here." No apology. No offer to switch in the morning. No suggestion that Dean might give up his spot. Just that smile that says, "You understand, right? You always do." I looked at Dean. He didn't even blink. Just shifted his weight and looked past me, like I was part of the scenery, like a tree or a rock, something there but not worth remarking. "Aunt!" The chair was a cheap folding thing with a sagging seat and a crooked leg. The fire had gone out hours earlier. The night air was thick with bugs, and the kind of silence that feels loud when it's pointed at you. I sat down in that chair like I'd been assigned a role in a play I never auditioned for. Wrapped myself in the thin throw blanket I found in the trunk. Held that pillow like it might still love me. I told myself it was just for one night. That they were tired. That I was overreacting. That Dean was just caught in the middle. But none of that rang true. What was true was this. They made room for themselves. Not for me. I stared at the RV windows glowing from inside, shadows moving, shapes laughing, the outline of Dean's arm as he passed a can of beer to his brother. I was a ghost outside my own marriage. A beetle landed on my shoulder and I didn't. Brush it off. I don't know how long I sat there. The sky eventually turned, the stars faded into a chalky grey, and the crickets gave way to early birds. I was stiff, sore, bitten and cold. But it wasn't my body that hurt the most. It was the part of me that finally accepted what I'd been pretending not to know. I had spent years swallowing slights like they were communion wafers, small, dry, and supposed to mean something. But that morning I felt something sharp rise in my throat. And for once I didn't push it down. They say you don't bleed from a single paper cut, but stack 1,000 on top of each other and eventually you drown in red. That morning, as I stood from the folding chair, my back stiff, my hair damp with dew, I felt each of those tiny cuts reopen. All the comments, glances, forgotten invitations and jokes at my expense came back, not as memories, but as weights pressing down on my lungs. I had let so many things slide, believing it kept the peace. But the truth is, peace built on silence is just a prettier kind of war. Dean didn't ask how I slept. He offered me a lukewarm cup of coffee, already halfway sipped. Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Come rest inside." Just a shrug, a "You good?" as if the night I spent outside like a stray animal didn't warrant even basic acknowledgement. Told him I was fine. I'd learned how to say it so many different ways, through clenched teeth, through tired smiles, through the careful stacking of disposable cups. That morning I said it with my hands, taking the coffee and sipping it without flinching. I tasted the bitterness and let it settle in my throat like a promise. I went through the motions that day, made breakfast, folded blankets, scrubbed the pan no one rinsed. But inside me, something was shifting. The small slights, those things I once thought I could live with, were beginning to fuse into something sharp, like the time Dean's mother forgot to introduce me at her church. Social and later said, "It just slipped my mind, sweetie, don't take it personally." Or how his sister once changed her Facebook profile photo to a family group picture that cropped me out completely, though I'd been standing just one person away, or that Thanksgiving, when I made 3 pies from scratch, and his brother said, "I miss when Ma did the desserts. Yours are fine, but they're not home." They weren't trying to be cruel, that's what made it worse. They were simply careless, thoughtless. Wrapped in their own noise and warmth, never noticing the chill they left on the edges where I stood. Dean always said, "They don't mean it like that." And maybe they didn't. But does it matter if you didn't mean to burn someone when they're still on fire? Sometimes I'd find myself shrinking without realizing it, talking less, laughing quieter, sitting at the end of the table so my silence wouldn't interrupt their rhythm. I remember one time during game night I answered a trivia question right, and his mother actually blinked in surprise. "Didn't know you knew that," she said. It wasn't meant to hurt, but it did, because underneath it was the truth. They had built a version of me in their minds, useful, quiet, forgettable, and every time I stepped outside it they seemed confused. I stopped correcting them. They got my birthday wrong one year, off by 2 days. I didn't say anything. Dean handed me a card that said, "To a wonderful daughter," clearly one he grabbed without reading. His mum laughed when I opened it. "Just cross it out and write wife." I laughed too. I don't know why. Even at work I caught myself disappearing, taking the late shifts, letting younger co-workers speak over me, pretending I didn't have ideas during meetings. I carried that same softness into every room I entered, like a cloak I couldn't remove, even when it began to choke me. The worst part was, I thought I was being noble. I thought enduring made me strong. I didn't realize that strength isn't the same thing as absence, that giving up your voice doesn't make you virtuous, it just makes you easier to forget. There was one object I always carried with me, though, tucked into the inner pocket of my purse, in a small white envelope, slightly yellowed at the corners. It was handed to me at my grandmother's funeral, but I'd never opened it. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew whatever it held would remind me of who I used to be, and I wasn't ready to meet that girl again. The envelope was sealed tight, the kind that licks your memories shut. I kept it close, even if I couldn't bear to touch it. A hidden inheritance, not of money or property, but of something deeper. A version of me that existed before I made myself small. When Dean and I first got married, I showed him my old sketches, watercolours of houses, portraits of strangers from my coffee shops, little scraps of colour and light I once believed in. He said, "That's nice," and never asked again. I boxed them up the next day. That box sat unopened in the coat closet for 11 years, 11 years of maybe next month, 11 years of they need me more right now, 11 years of not wanting to seem ungrateful, or worse, selfish, but as I folded the camping chairs that afternoon and watched his sister pack leftovers into Tupperware I brought, I realised something chilling. They would keep taking as long as I kept giving. They would keep forgetting me, even as I made everything unforgettable for them. They would always sleep comfortably, while I sat outside wondering why I wasn't enough. And the more I thought about it, the more I knew. It wasn't that I wasn't enough. It was that I had made myself too easy to use. That night, I didn't cry. I sat outside again, this time by choice, and I let the cold speak for me. Because sometimes, the breaking point isn't loud. It's a whisper you finally hear. For the first time. That night, I sat outside again. This time, I didn't bother pretending it was a choice. I didn't wait for anyone to notice. I didn't expect a knock on the RV door or a change of heart. I just took the same folding chair from the night before, wrapped the same thin towel around my shoulders, and let the dark do what it does best. Reveal everything silence covers. There was a hum in the trees, the kind that slips under your skin when the world is done talking. No fire, no flashlight, just the dull blue tint of moonlight and a few stubborn coals still glowing faint beneath the ash. I watched one flicker out, slow and steady, like it had finally decided it wasn't worth fighting the wind. That was how I felt, like an ember pretending to be a flame. The RV door shut behind me earlier than it had the night before. No good night. No offer of a blanket or apology. I could hear the faint clang of forks being tossed into the sink, the muffled laugh of Dean's brother as he retold a story I wasn't part of. Even in laughter, they sounded heavy to me, like a house settling. after years of being poorly built. I stared up at the sky, thinking about how far away the stars looked. I tried to pick one and pretend it had a message for me. That kind of game felt childish, but I did it anyway. Then I thought about my grandmother, the way she used to sit on her porch with a bowl of peaches in her lap, watching the sunset without saying a word. There was a kind of power in her stillness I never understood until now. She never chased attention. She never begged to be included. She just was. And if you couldn't see her, that was your loss. I curled tighter in the towel and closed my eyes. Not to sleep, but to stop remembering. But that's when the memories come. When the noise finally stops, and this one came in like a whisper, so sharp it might as well have been shouted. I was 8 years old, sitting cross-legged on the bedroom floor, drawing with a stubby red pencil I'd sharpened down to its nub. I'd drawn a picture of my parents, holding hands in front of our old house, smiling. We weren't a smiling kind of family, but I wanted to see what it looked like. When I showed it to my dad, he didn't even glance at it. He just said, "That looks like nonsense. Go help your mother with the dishes." I remember hiding the drawing under my bed, ashamed not of what I'd drawn, but that I thought it was worth sharing. I hadn't drawn anything since. That memory clung to me like fog, and I wrapped my arms tighter around myself, suddenly cold in a new way. Not skin cold, soul cold. I stared at the RV. I imagined knocking on the door and asking Dean just once, "Why didn't you stand up for me?" I imagined his answer, probably a shrug, maybe a tired, "Can we not do this right now?" I imagined screaming. Throwing the lawn chair into the woods, driving off and never coming back. But instead I sat there, completely still, because stillness was the only thing I had left that belonged to me, and in that stillness I stopped pretending. Pretending that things would get better, that this family would one day see me, that Dean loved me the way a husband is supposed to, that I could keep giving without becoming invisible. I stopped defending them in my mind. I stopped blaming myself. I stopped needing anything from anyone inside that RV. What broke wasn't my heart. That had been cracking for years. What broke was the contract I never signed but lived by anyway, the one that said, "You must keep everyone else warm even if you freeze." No more. I took a deep breath and felt it fill me differently, like it wasn't just air but the first truth I'd swallowed in years. I didn't cry, I didn't yell. I didn't run. I just sat there, awake with my own awakening. When dawn crept in, soft and grey like regret, I stood up slowly, joints stiff from the cold. I didn't fold the towel. I left it draped over the chair, a small act of rebellion, no. One would notice but me. Then I walked past the RV, didn't glance back, and sat at the picnic table alone. Dean came out eventually, scratching his neck, looking groggy. "You didn't come in last night," he said. "No," I replied. He stared at me for a moment. Maybe trying to understand. Maybe not. I didn't offer an explanation. I didn't ask him to apologize. I didn't ask for space or love or acknowledgement. I just looked him in the eye, and in that look I told him, "You let them put me out like trash. And now I've stopped waiting to be picked back up." He went back inside without saying anything else. That morning I didn't cook breakfast. I didn't help pack. I didn't brush crumbs off the picnic table or fold the tent that someone left half-zipped. I sat there with my hands flat against the wood and listened to my own breath. The world didn't end, but mine was starting over. I remembered that little red pencil, how small it felt in my hand, how hopeful I'd been when I carried that picture to my father, and how, in one moment, a child learned silence was safer than expression. Have you ever remembered something small, just when everything felt like it was falling apart? Later that week, I walked away from the only life I'd known, and no one followed, not because they didn't care, but because they didn't think I'd really leave. I didn't make a scene. I didn't leave a note. I didn't cry, shout, or demand anything. I just packed. 4 days after the camping trip, after the second night outside, after the blank look, in Dean's eyes I came home from work, took a deep breath, and started folding clothes into a suitcase I hadn't used in years. The one I bought when I thought we'd travel more, visit the Grand Canyon, the Painted Hills, maybe even Maine in the fall. It still had the price tag tucked in the inner pocket. Dean wasn't home. His job site had called him in for weekend work. His absence was a mercy. I didn't want him to see the way I folded my sweaters with such care. It would have confused him. He always thought silence meant I was fine. By the time he came back, I'd already turned in my key at the library, filled out a sublease for a short-term apartment above a bakery on Oak Street, and paid the deposit with money I'd quietly saved from a side gig tutoring high school students. He didn't even know I'd been working extra hours. Why would he? I never told him. I'd learned long ago that anything that didn't directly benefit him was a distraction. I didn't take everything. Just enough. Enough to start over. Without looking back and thinking I'd left something important behind. The truth was, most of what filled that house wasn't mine. Not really. It belonged to his family, pictures of people who never smiled at me, furniture handed down by his mother, curtains she chose because you don't really have a colour sense, sweetie. Even the kitchen towels had her initials embroidered. Into the corner. I walked out wearing a plain grey sweater, carrying a bag with one side fraying at the strap. I locked the door behind me. I didn't look over my shoulder. That night, in the new apartment, I sat cross-legged on the floor beside the only lamp I brought. I turned it on, then off, then on again. Not because I needed the light, but because I could. No one called, no one texted, not at first, and that silence confirmed what I already knew. They didn't think I'd really go, not me, the helper, the one who always said, "It's okay," and meant it, even when it wasn't. But it was okay now. Not joyful, not easy, but okay in the truest, quietest way. I wasn't waiting for someone to rescue me from the cold. I had stepped inside on my own and closed the door behind me. I didn't call my mother either. There was too much history, too many conversations that ended in guilt and passive prayers. She meant well, but she never understood why I stayed so long. Or maybe she did, and didn't want to look at her own mirror. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I pulled out the envelope. It was creased at the corners slightly, yellowed, the seal still intact. The handwriting was unmistakable, my grandmother's loops and leanings, the T always left uncrossed. I had carried that envelope through 2 moves and countless storms, always tucked inside my purse like a secret I was too afraid to open. But that night, in the aftermath of everything, I opened it. Inside was a single piece of folded paper. No letter, no explanation, just a sketch, a little cabin by a lake. Trees clustered around it, smoke drifting from the chimney. And in the corner, in faint pencil, were the words, "Build it when you're ready, not before." I stared at that sketch for a long time, tracing the lines with my fingers like they were maps to some place I'd forgotten. My grandmother had wanted to build that cabin but never did. Life got in the way. Husbands, children, expectations. And then she died, leaving the dream behind in graphite and paper. I tucked the sketch into a new frame and placed it on the windowsill. My first act of reclamation. The next day, Dean called. I didn't answer. He called again, and again. Then came the texts. "Where are you? Can we talk? You're blowing this out of proportion. I told you they didn't mean anything. Buy it." Each message chipped away at the shell he'd wrapped himself in, the one that had protected him from looking too closely at what he'd done, or what he'd allowed. But I didn't reply. Because silence isn't just something you endure. Sometimes it's a choice. Sometimes it's the loudest boundary you can set. On the 3rd day, he came to the old house. My neighbour called to tell me he knocked for nearly 10 minutes. Said he looked more confused than angry. Said he kept looking down at his phone like the right words might suddenly appear. They didn't. I sat in my new place, listening to the bakery close for the night below me, the clatter of pans and the soft click of the back door. I liked those sounds. They didn't ask anything of me. I made myself a cup of tea and sat with my legs wrapped in a quilt I'd found at a thrift shop. Bright yellow squares, mismatched but warm. I didn't cry. I didn't celebrate. I just sat in the stillness. I'd earned silent scene rule. That night, I stood at the window and watched the street empty out. I saw Dean's truck drive slowly by. He paused in front of the building, engine idling. But he didn't get out. He didn't knock. He just sat there, staring at the door, then drove off. And I didn't move, not even when the taillights disappeared. What he didn't know was that while he was searching for me, I was already untying the knots he left behind. And what came next would make sure I never had to sleep outside again, because I was about to sell the one thing they all took for granted. I didn't plan it like a revenge story. It wasn't a strategy. It was a realization, quiet and unshakable. One morning, about a week after I left, I stood in my tiny kitchen watching steam rise from my mug of coffee. There was a particular stillness in the air, the kind that only comes after something irreversible. That's when I remembered the RV. It hit me so suddenly I laughed out loud. Not bitter, not cruel, just in disbelief. That big, shiny home on wheels had been the centerpiece of so many of Dean's family plans. His sister once joked it was the castle on wheels. His mother called it the family's travel home. And yet it wasn't theirs. Not legally. The title was in my name. Only mine. Dean had asked me to co-sign when his credit didn't pass muster. I'd said yes, like I always did. But what I didn't realise then, and what no one else had apparently bothered to check, was that I ended up the sole registered owner. I hadn't looked at that paperwork in years. But now, I pulled out the file from my small lockbox and stared. At it. My name, printed clearly across the top. Sole owner. Not co-owner, not Mrs. Dean, just me. I don't know if I smiled. I just remember feeling something shift inside me, like a door opening I didn't know was locked. I wasn't trapped anymore. I wasn't waiting to be chosen. I wasn't stuck in their RV or their narrative. I called the dealership that afternoon. The man on the phone was friendly, eager even. RV demand had been up, he told me, especially one that well maintained. If the photos look like you say, he said, you'll have no trouble finding a buyer. I drove out to Dean's brother's place the next morning, where the RV had been parked for the past 6 months. No one was home. I still had the keys. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and took a long look around. They'd made it their own, filled it with mismatched cushions, a family calendar still taped to the wall, leftover chips in the cabinets, and a broken pair of sunglasses on the table. It smelled like sunscreen and burnt coffee. It looked lived in, but it wasn't theirs. I didn't touch anything except the keys. I closed the door, locked it behind me, and slid the shades down on. Every window, I listed it that same afternoon. 2019 Forest River Sunseeker RV. Excellent condition. One owner. Serious inquiries only. I added clear, bright pictures, left out the family drama. Within 3 days I had 5 offers. By the end of the week it was sold, cash in hand. The dealership sent a tow truck to pick it up. I didn't even have to drive it. Dean found out 2 days later. He called 5 times in a row. No voicemail, just hang-ups. On the 6th try, he finally left a message. You sold the RV, without asking me. Are you serious right now? I didn't respond. He tried guilt next. That was the family's. You knew we had plans this fall, you. Knew my mom, my brother. Hell, we were going to give it to him for their wedding present. Ah, there it was. They were going to give my RV, my loan, my credit, my investment, away like it was some hand-me-down casserole dish. Like it never mattered that I helped them all with it. That I spent nights in that parking lot in a folding chair while they toasted marshmallows inside. I didn't answer that call either. Instead, I deposited the cashier's check and wrote a single line in my journal that night. They made me sleep outside, so I sold what they slept in. That was the twist. Not revenge, not anger, just ownership of my choices, my name, my narrative. A few days later, I received a group text from his sister. I hope you're proud of yourself. You've torn this family apart. I stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. I didn't need to prove anything. Not anymore. And yet, one part of the story still waited. That envelope, my grandmother's sketch of the cabin, I looked at it every night now, like a compass. It reminded me that even dreams left behind could still shape the future. So I started researching tiny plots of land, lakefront listings, quiet places with wild trees and space to breathe. I wasn't ready to build it yet, but I was ready to believe I could. They had taken so much from me, time, energy, my own voice. But they didn't get the ending. I did. For years I carried that unopened envelope like dead weight, afraid of what it might tell me about the life I'd given up. But what it really held wasn't guilt or grief, it was permission. A blueprint, passed from one silenced woman to another. Now, it was pinned to the wall of my new apartment. They thought I'd rebuild quietly, maybe come crawling back one day. But instead I learned how to exist without apology. And that frightened them more than any anger ever could. You'd be surprised how much space you get back when you stop living inside someone else's expectations. After I sold the RV and cut off the chorus of voicemails from Dean's family, I didn't make a grand announcement. I didn't change my social media status, post some triumphant selfie or announce I'm free. No. I just got to work rebuilding a life that was mine, and mine alone. It started with the small things. I bought new pillows, not the flat, faded ones Dean liked, but firm ones with textured pillowcases that matched nothing but made me smile. I let the colour plum return to my life, a colour Dean once called too loud. I painted the walls of my small apartment in 3 colours, plum, sage and a warm, soft rust. The landlord said I'd have to repaint them when I left. I told her I'd cross that bridge when I was done living here. I didn't fill the space with furniture, just the essentials. A chair by the window, a small table with uneven legs, a bookshelf with too many poetry books, and a ceramic bowl that held my grandmother's cabin sketch. The bowl was chipped. I loved it more for that. On Thursdays, I started going to a little bookstore on the edge of town. They had an open mic poetry night. At first I sat in the back quiet, then I started bringing a notebook. Then one night, without planning it, I stood up and read. It wasn't about Dean. It wasn't even about his family. It was about a moth. I'd seen beating itself against a window at dawn, trying to get back to the dark. When I finished, no one clapped too hard. No one stood up, but someone whispered, "Thank you," on my way back to my seat. That was enough. I got a job at the bookstore 2 weeks later, just part-time. Enough to pay the bills and keep me surrounded by things that made sense. Stories, paper, people who valued quiet. No one there knew me as Dean's wife. No one asked me to explain why I left. They just asked what kind of tea I liked and if I preferred hardcovers or paperbacks. I chose hardcover every time. I was done with things that collapsed too easily. Dean. Still called, still texted. At first it was every day, then once a week, then only when something broke or needed explaining. I didn't block him, but I stopped responding. I didn't owe him rage or forgiveness or answers. One afternoon he texted, "I don't understand what happened to you." I stared at those words for a long time before setting the phone down. Nothing happened to me. I just stopped happening. For them, I walked more. I let my legs take me into neighbourhoods I never had time to notice before. I passed houses with porches and wind chimes, gardens blooming out of old bathtubs, fences painted by children's hands. I smiled at dogs. I nodded at old men sweeping their steps. The world became softer. One evening, just as summer began to tip into fall, I went to the lake. Not the big one where Dean's family camped, but a smaller one, tucked into a quiet park on the north side. I brought a sandwich and a sketch pad. I'd been too afraid to open for years. I sat on a bench, wrapped in a shawl my grandmother once knitted for my mother. The wind danced across the water. I opened the sketch pad. My hands trembled as I drew the shoreline, then the way the light caught in the trees. My strokes were rusty. My perspective wobbled. But it was mine. Every line. Every curve. I didn't draw for praise. I drew to remember who I was before I became someone else's support beam, and when I finished, I signed the bottom corner with a little shape, a folded towel. It was something only I would understand. A symbol of what they made me sleep in, of the thing I left behind, and the warmth I now gave myself. Over the next few weeks, I drew more. I framed a few. Gave one to the bookstore owner, who hung it in the window with a sticky note, painted by someone who learned to stay. I never talked about the RV, about the humiliation, about the folding chair under the stars. That part of the story belonged to the old me, the one who endured to be accepted, the new me. I didn't endure, I lived. Still, quiet didn't mean weak. I heard whispers from Dean's family through old friends and mutual connections. They said I'd gone cold, that I was selfish, that she must be going through something. They framed my absence like it was a breakdown, not a breakthrough. Let them. I didn't need to defend peace. One day, I passed our old house. The lawn was overgrown. The porch light was out. Dean's truck was in the driveway, dented in the front bumper. I slowed for only a moment. There was no rage. No sorrow. Just a quiet knowing. I never wanted to be inside that house again. Not physically, not emotionally, not spiritually. I had built a new home. Plum walls, quiet nights, Thursday poems, and framed drawings of the life I had reclaimed, and every time I laid my head on those firm new pillows, I remembered what it felt like to sleep outside, and why I never would again. But they couldn't believe it. They were sure I was bluffing, just going through a phase. They never imagined. The quiet one would stay gone, and when I finally showed them what I'd become, it was their turn to feel exposed. They thought I was just going through something, that I'd come back. Not today, maybe, but eventually. Dean's mother even said it out loud in one of her voicemails. She'll come around. She always does. Like I was a bad mood, a misfiring, wire, something to wait out. They didn't understand that I hadn't left on impulse. I had left on purpose. In their world, silence meant surrender. But mine wasn't surrender. It was survival. It was the sound a woman makes when she finally stops explaining herself. At first, they tried sweetness. Dean sent flowers, store-bought, daisies in plastic wrap, no note. A few days later, his sister messaged me a photo from a birthday party I hadn't been invited to, writing, "We missed you. Hope you're doing okay." Like I'd just slept through it. Like I hadn't been shut out of their warmth for years and finally decided to stop knocking. I didn't respond. Then came the guilt. His brother called me cold. His cousin told a mutual friend, "She always looked like she might snap someday. Guess she finally did." They framed my peace as madness, my boundaries as betrayal. But I had no interest in correcting them. I was too busy building. I joined a Saturday painting group at the library. Ironically, the same library I once shelved books in, back when my days revolved around everyone else's needs. Now I sat in the sunlit corner, brush in hand, painting soft skies and crooked trees with women who wore their silver hair like crowns. One of them, Eileen, brought me tea every week. She never pried. She just said, "You've got that survivor look about you, but now it's softening." I smiled. That was enough. One evening, I hosted a small gallery night in the bookstore, 12 of my paintings arranged across borrowed easels and repurposed window displays. I called the collection Things That Chose to Grow Anyway. Dean came. I didn't expect it. He walked in wearing the same boots he always did, the same denim jacket with the tear in the sleeve. He looked at the paintings like they might speak. To him. They didn't. He approached me slowly, like someone trying not to scare off a wounded animal. "I didn't know you were still doing this," he said. I shrugged. "You never asked." He glanced down, hands in his pockets. "You look different." I didn't reply. He wasn't wrong. I did look different, but not in any way he could name. Then he said it, the line I'd been waiting for. "Are you ever coming home?" And I said softly, "I am home." He stood, there, blinking. I could see it registering for the first time, not the anger, not the distance, but the finality. The version of me who'd endured the jokes, The exclusions, the long nights outside. She was gone. In her place stood a woman who had outgrown the silence and the space they once expected her to stay small in. He left without buying a painting. Later that week, I received a letter in the mail. No return address, but the handwriting was his mother's. Inside was a short note scribbled in blue ink. Families have rough patches, but forgiveness is free. We all miss you, dear. Don't stay stubborn. No apology. Just expectation. I folded the letter and placed it in the back of my sketchbook, behind the first page, the drawing of the lake. Not because I planned to answer it, but because it reminded me why I left. They hadn't changed. They hadn't even tried. They simply thought I'd break and come crawling back for scraps. They didn't understand that I had already broken. Years. I just learned how to build from the broken pieces. One morning, I passed by the community board in the bookstore and saw a flyer. Local artists needed. Fundraiser exhibit for women's shelter. Without hesitation, I took a tear-off tab and called. A month later, I sold 3 pieces. All of them featured a small towel, folded on a chair, in the background of a quiet room. No one noticed at first, but when they asked what it meant, I just smiled and said, "It's a symbol of what you leave behind when you stop begging to belong." Each painting went to a woman with her own kind of silence, and I kept painting. They say healing is loud, triumphant, blazing, a phoenix from the ashes, but mine was none of that. Mine was soft, slow, steady. A river wearing down stone, a quilt stitched by lamplight, a sketch made in the hours no one else could see. Dean's family never truly grieved my absence. They simply adjusted the furniture. Moved the chairs a little closer, said remember when a little less. They didn't see it as a loss, they saw it as my failure to return. But that was their blindness, not my burden. I never tried to make them understand. Some people don't speak the language of growth. They only recognize volume and echo. I no longer had any need to raise my voice. I just kept living, and that, it turned out, was the one thing they never expected. So when the moment came to face them again, I didn't rehearse a speech. I didn't sharpen my words or plan my posture. I just walked in, with nothing to prove and everything to protect. It came in the form of an invitation. A beige envelope slipped under the door of the bookstore one rainy Wednesday afternoon. No return address, just my name, handwritten in blocky familiar lettering, Dean's. Inside was a single sheet of paper, torn from a legal pad. Mum wants to have everyone over. She says it's time we talked. Saturday at 4. Just come. No. Drama, just closure. D, there was no apology. No recognition of what had passed. Just a casual summons, as though I'd simply wandered off and they were calling me back like a dog they assumed still remembered its leash. At first, I considered ignoring it. But something in me, some small, steel-threaded part, told me it was time. Not for reconciliation, not even for answers, just for presence. I had spent years being the one who showed up and stayed quiet. Now I would show up and stay intact. So on Saturday, I went. I didn't call ahead. I didn't ask who'd be there. I just put on a red dress, bold, simple, the one colour they always said washed me out, and drove myself to Dean's sister's house, where every Thanksgiving and birthday and baby shower had once unfolded in a haze of potluck dishes and passive barbs. I parked across the street. It had rained earlier, and the ground smelled like wet leaves and gasoline. My heels clicked across the pavement, each step echoing louder than I expected. I didn't slow down. Inside, the air was thick with too much perfume and too little truth. Dean's mother greeted me at the door like I was a guest they'd reluctantly invited. "Didn't think you'd come," she said, lips thin. "I almost didn't," I replied, "but I wanted to return something." She blinked, confused, but stepped aside. The others were already gathered. Dean, his sister, his brother, his brother's wife. They sat in a semicircle around the living room like a jury waiting to deliberate. I noticed the couch sagged slightly where Dean had chosen to sit, elbows on his knees, eyes unsure. His mother gestured to the one remaining chair. "I'll stand," I said. For a moment no one spoke. Then Dean cleared his throat. "We just thought, maybe it's time to clear the air." "The air is already clear," I said. "You just didn't expect me to breathe differently." Dean's sister huffed, crossing her arms. "Why'd you sell the RV?" The question dropped like a brick. I didn't flinch. Instead, I reached into my bag and pulled out two things, the original title with my name on it, and the check stub. From the dealership. I set them both gently on the coffee table. "This is why," I said. "Because it was mine, and because after everything, I decided I wouldn't sleep outside ever again while you all stayed warm on something I paid for." Dean's mother stiffened. "We didn't make you sleep outside." "You didn't stop it either," I said softly. "None of you did. You watched me carry your food, your folding chairs, your family traditions. And when there wasn't room for me, you shut the door and laughed from the inside." Dean looked up finally. "I didn't know it hurt you that much." I turned to him. "No, Dean. You didn't want to know." That was the difference. And it landed. His face crumbled slightly, like he hadn't been expecting to feel anything that deep. Maybe he thought I'd yell, cry, make it easy for them to dismiss me again. But I didn't bring fire. I brought facts. His brother leaned forward. "You blindsided us. That RV was supposed to be part of your plans," I finished. "Always your plans. I was just the one paying for them." Dean's mother shook her head. "We took you in like family. We made space for you." "No," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "You made room when it was convenient. You gave me a folding chair at your table and called it love." The room went still. No one knew what to say. They hadn't prepared for this version of me, the one who didn't lower her voice, didn't shrink in shame, didn't cry from the back of the room. They had expected the woman they once overlooked. Instead, I handed them a mirror. Then I reached into my bag again and pulled out the RV key. I set it on the table beside the paperwork. "I don't need this anymore. Thought it might help you understand what ownership looks like and how it feels to let go." They stared at the key like it was a weapon. But it wasn't. It was just a key. Ordinary. Small. And now, meaningless. I turned to leave. Dean stood. "So that's it?" "Yes," I said without turning around. "That's finally it." And with that I walked out. No slammed doors, no raised voices, just the echo of my heels on the same steps I'd once climbed carrying casseroles and birthday, gifts and the weight of their indifference. Outside, the sky was clearing. The rain had stopped. The street shimmered in the light like it had been rinsed clean, and I felt free. I thought it would feel like victory, like triumph. But it didn't. It felt quiet, solid, true. And the truth was still waiting for me, hidden, in what they never dared to say. 2 weeks passed before I learned the rest. I hadn't planned to dig anymore. I thought the confrontation had been the last page. But stories don't always end where you expect. They just pause until someone picks up the thread again. It came from Marcy, an old mutual friend who used to work with Dean's cousin. She stopped by the bookstore on a quiet Tuesday, said she was just browsing, but lingered by the register like she had something else on her mind. After a few minutes, she leaned in. "I wasn't going to say anything," she began, "but you deserve to know. They planned it. The whole RV thing." I looked up from the stack of bookmarks I'd been sorting. "What do you mean?" "I mean," she said, lowering her voice, "they had already decided they were going to give the RV to Brian and Natalie as a wedding present. They just hadn't figured out how to explain it to you yet." She said it gently, like a nurse delivering a delayed diagnosis. I felt my breath pause in my chest. Not because I didn't believe it, but because deep down I'd already known. Marcy continued. "Apparently Dean told them it would be easier if you just kind of let it go. They figured if you stayed distant it'd all happen smoothly. That weekend camping was sort of a test run." I swallowed hard. The folding chair, the turned backs, the RV door shut in my face. They weren't accidents. They were rehearsal. Marcy looked genuinely sorry. I didn't know all the details back then, but when I heard about the sale, I thought you should have the whole story. I nodded. Thank you. She squeezed my arm and left quietly, as if she'd just handed me something delicate. I sat in the back room for a long while after that, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the hum of the fluorescent light. The truth didn't hurt like a stab. It hurt like pressure. A slow crush in the ribs. A confirmation of every gut feeling I'd tried to ignore. They had planned to gift what I had paid for. Not just the vehicle, but the time, the debt, the hope I had once stitched into that idea of travel, togetherness, escape. They were going. To hand it off like a casserole dish, smiling all the while, and Dean. He knew. He didn't stop them. He didn't speak up. He didn't tell me, not once, that this was coming. He had looked at me that night outside the RV and said nothing, because he needed my silence to finish their story. In that moment, something inside me folded shut, not with bitterness. Not even with rage, just finality. He hadn't just failed to protect me. He had offered me up for their convenience, not violently, not loudly, just with the quiet approval of someone who values peace over people. That night I wrote him a letter. I never sent it, but I needed to write it, to carve the truth into something permanent so it would stop living in my chest. Dean, I hope they enjoy the space I built. I hope they appreciate the softness I provided, the quiet I kept, the steadiness I gave while you all built stories around me without ever asking what mine was. You didn't forget me. You chose to overlook me. There's a difference, and that difference is the reason you'll never know me again. Not really. Not truly. Because the woman you once depended on. She woke up. And she walked out. I folded the letter and tucked it into the back of my sketchbook next to his mother's note. I didn't need to reread it. Just writing it made it real enough. Later that week, I saw Dean again. He didn't know I was at the farmer's market until he turned around from the peach, stand and spotted me under the awning, sorting through wildflowers. He froze. I didn't. I picked up a bouquet, yellow sunflowers, maroon zinnias, soft lavender, and handed the vendor a 10. Dean walked over, slowly. His shirt was wrinkled. He hadn't shaved. Hey, he said, too casual. You look... well. I said simply. There was a long silence between us. Then he asked, Did someone tell you? Yes. He nodded. Didn't deny it. His face darkened. Not with guilt, but with something smaller. Something almost childlike. I didn't know how to stop it, he said. They just expect things from me. And I figured you'd be okay. I looked at him then, really looked, and for the first time I saw it, the boy inside the man, the one who was always afraid of disappointing people louder than me. He hadn't made a mistake. He had made a choice, a weak one. I was never your shield, I said quietly. But you used me like one. His eyes watered, not dramatically, but just enough that he blinked too often. I didn't mean for it to go that far, but it did, I said. And now it's gone farther than you can follow, he didn't reply. Just stood there, holding a bruised peach in one hand and every unspoken apology in the other. I walked away, not angry, not triumphant, just free. As I left him standing there, I saw it, not the villain I once painted him to be, but the hollow shape of a man who'd never built anything without someone else's strength. For a second, I felt pity. Then I remembered the night I slept outside while he turned off the porch light, and the pity passed. The truth didn't set me ablaze. It didn't beg for revenge. It simply whispered, You were never the one who needed fixing. And that was when I knew. The real win was never about getting even. It was about getting whole. I always thought the moment of justice would feel loud, explosive, like thunder rolling in over flat land, impossible to ignore, undeniable in its arrival, but when it came, it didn't look like a courtroom drama or a tearful apology. It looked like me, sitting alone in a sunlit room, sipping black tea and not checking my phone. It looked like peace. It wasn't that I didn't hurt anymore. The scars were there. The nights outside the RV. The silence at the family table. The knowing that I was always just a placeholder, never a participant. That pain didn't vanish. It just stopped running the show. I no longer needed them to understand. Forgiveness, when it finally came, didn't show up like a dove or a poem. It came like a tired exhale, like finally putting down a bag you forgot you'd been carrying for years. One morning, I walked to the lake again. The small one, the quiet one, where the birch trees bent like old women whispering secrets. I sat with my sketchbook, open to a blank page, and began drawing without needing it to be good. I drew a cabin, a soft chimney curl, a single chair on the porch, a small towel folded on the railing, my grandmother's dream translated through my hand. A dream passed down, but never lived, until now. I realised then that revenge was just another kind of leash. It keeps you tied to the thing that broke you. And I wasn't tethered anymore. I'd slipped the collar. They had laughed while I sat, outside in the dark. They had whispered about gifting away what I had built. They had watched me shrink and called it humility. And still, I didn't burn their house down. I didn't curse their name. I simply walked out of it and built my own. I didn't go back to Dean. I didn't message his mother. I didn't explain my silence to anyone who wasn't willing to hold it gently. Instead, I leaned deeper into my life. I started leading the Thursday night poetry readings at the bookstore. I printed my first collection, small, local, humble. I called it Things You Don't Have to Say Out Loud. People cried when they read it, people I didn't even know. And slowly, new people came into my world. People who didn't care who I used to be. People who didn't ask me to shrink or explain or earn my place at the table. They just set down a cup of tea and said, "Stay as long as you like." One evening, I got a letter from Dean, handwritten. No return address, just my name. "I guy was weak," he wrote. "I see it now. You were the strongest person in that room, and we used your strength like it belonged to us. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. I'm sorry I let them laugh while you sat outside. I thought you'd stay. You always did." Then, the final line. "I don't expect to hear back, but I wanted you to know I see it now, I really do. I read it twice." Then folded it neatly and placed it in the drawer with my grandmother's sketch and the unsigned letter I'd written him weeks earlier. I didn't need to respond. He hadn't asked me to, and more importantly, I had nothing left to say. Sometimes closure doesn't come in conversation. Sometimes it comes when you stop needing anything from the person who broke your heart. I walked into my kitchen, lit a small candle, and sat in the armchair by the window. I wrapped the old shawl around my shoulders and looked at the framed sketch of the cabin. It no longer made me ache. It made me want to build. I didn't win by outsmarting them. I won by not becoming them. I won by not shouting when I had every reason to, by not slamming doors, by not using pain as a weapon. I won because I learned how to walk away and still carry gentleness, and that, in the end, is the quiet miracle no one expects from a woman they thought would stay broken. What would you have done in my shoes? Do you believe quiet dignity is stronger than revenge? Tell me in the comments, I'll be reading every one. Now, years later, I don't remember the moment I forgave them. I remember the moment I forgave myself, and that was when I finally knew. The ending wasn't the night they left me outside. It was the morning I let myself in. I think a lot about the woman I used to be. She still visits me sometimes. In dreams, in the quiet hour between dusk and nightfall, in the way I reach for the second plate out of habit before remembering I only need one now. She was good. Good in the way that made other people comfortable, soft, accommodating. The kind of woman who made room for everyone but herself. But I've stopped mourning her, not because she was weak, but because she believed that love meant losing your shape to fit someone else's design. I carried her through so many years. I know why she stayed. I also know why she left. There's a strange relief in realizing you don't owe anyone a version of yourself that disappears to keep the peace. Peace, I learned, isn't silence. It's knowing the sound of your own heartbeat and choosing not to drown it out with other people's needs. In the time since I walked away, the world didn't collapse. The sun still rises. The bakery below my apartment still opens at 6. The bookstore still smells like dust and rain. Life didn't crumble without their approval. It unfolded, quietly, tenderly, like a bud that finally gets enough sunlight. See things differently now. The folding chair I once sat in outside the RV. I think of it often, not with shame but with clarity. That chair taught me something no wedding vow or family dinner ever could. When people show you your place in their world, believe them, but then decide if you want to stay there. That night under the stars, I wasn't discarded. I was revealed. Not to them, they weren't looking, but to myself. And once you see the truth of your worth, you can't unsee it. No matter how many sweet apologies or subtle gaslights try to pull you back. There are still days I feel the old. Ache, certain smells, songs, seasons bring it back. But it's a dull echo now, not a wound. The pain doesn't own me. It reminds me. I've started saving again, not just money, but possibility. I keep a small envelope tucked in the back of my desk drawer labelled Cabin Fund. It's not much yet, but every month I add to it. $10, $20, a quiet promise to myself. Someday I'll build that place. Maybe not exactly like the sketch, maybe a little smaller or simpler. Maybe with a porch just wide enough for one chair and one mug of tea, and a hook for a towel that no one will ever ask me to sleep with again. I'll name it after something. Invisible. Something strong. Maybe Ember. Or Second Wind. And when I do, I'll hang my grandmother's drawing above the fireplace. I'll frame it in reclaimed wood, the kind with soft corners and nail holes. The kind that's been through something, just like me. If you had told me 5 years ago that I'd live alone in a small apartment, wear red dresses without permission, and host poetry readings in a bookstore with creaky floors, I would have laughed, or cried, or both. But this is the life I grew into, not in spite of what they did, but because I finally stopped waiting for them to undo it. There's power in walking away. Not storming out, not slamming doors, not leaving a trail of broken plates, but in choosing yourself so fully, so gently, that the world rearranges itself to meet your truth. I thought love meant endurance. That to be loved, I had to hold every silence, absorb every insult, smile through every erasure. But now I know, love without respect is not love at all. It's dependency wearing a borrowed face, and I don't borrow anymore. I build, I create, I speak, not to convince anyone, but because. I am no longer afraid of being heard. The RV is gone. The family dinner's moved on without me. Dean remarried, I heard. To someone who doesn't ask so many questions, according to mutual friends. I hope she learns to ask. I hope she learns to leave, if she needs to. As for me, I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. I'm just mine. Every quiet morning, every brushstroke, every new page in my sketchbook belongs to me. That's the real win. Not revenge, not proof, not applause, just peace. Honest and hard won. They thought I was just the woman holding the folding chair. But I was never meant to sit outside the door. I was the one carrying the blueprint all along. And now, I'm finally building the home they never made room for.